Hi everyone, my name is Qian Wang. I'm from China. Now I'm doing my PhD study in Sports Ethics Research Center of Charles University in Prague. And my PhD research is about studying the body and the movement in phenomenology and apply it to some topics in sports. And esports is one of my interests. And my presentation today is to discuss the fundamental difference between esports and sports from a Merleau-Pontian perspective, which is a phenomenological philosophy approach. Here is the table of content. Firstly, I'll introduce the starting point of my discussion, from which I dig into the analysis of the fundamental difference. Then I will sum up a main character of esports, which will be reflected within Merleau-Ponty's phenomenology. So, of course, I will introduce Merleau-Ponty's main ideas about the body and the movement, and apply his work to interpret the embodied meaning of the virtual world in esports. And in the end, I will display the fundamental difference between sports and esports. So no matter we agree esports are sports or not, I believe we can all agree that esports are activities involving the virtual world, while sports, in a general sense, are the activities happening in the lived world where our bodies are located. So the involvement of the virtual world is a general distinction between esports and sports, and I use it as a starting point to inquiry into the fundamental difference, which is the difference in the state of bodily movement in these two activities caused by this general difference. So in current literature, there are many discussions on esports. I selected some typical points. For example, Hoffman said it is the avatar that is being moved by joysticks or mouse clicks that determines the competition's outcome. And Pierre said the esports players are just distanced image manipulating remote controllers. Holt also mentions there's a domain of execution and a domain of application. They are separate in esports playing. So some esports supporters may not be happy with these descriptions, but they indeed present some factual aspects of esports. And one evidence for this is the fact that there's always a huge screens on esports arena showing the gameplay footage. Also, some broadcasts of esports matches only show the game footage rather than actual players who are competing. This is because seeing the players alone cannot tell us how exactly the game is proceeding. Of course, we also need to admit that the actions of avatar represent the players' techniques, speed, and strategies, which have important influence on the result of the game, and the players do perform some skills. Following this, I sum up a main character of esports, which is that esports virtual world on screen gives comprehensible contextual meaning to players' movement. This main character will be discussed within Merleau-Ponty's phenomenology later. So about Merleau-Ponty's phenomenology. Maurice Merleau-Ponty is a French phenomenologist. His book, Phenomenology of Perception, is my main reference here. In his work, Merleau-Ponty demonstrates the body is not an objective thing, which simply moves on the instruction of the mind. The body is pre-objective, which means it is through the body objects appear to us. He illustrates this point by contemplating vision, how an object appears as an object in our vision. This is not a personal experience, but a general universal experience shared among everyone who has visual sense, which is also a general phenomenological philosophy approach. If you have something on your desk now, if you gaze at the thing, you can find the thing gazed is clear and at the center of your vision, and all other things surrounding it are blurry, but they do not cease to be there. And when you switch your gaze to the other thing, the previous gaze become blurry, and the new gaze become clear and central. In Merleau-Ponty's words, when we gaze at an object, its surroundings recede to the margins of our vision, being dormant. At the same time, those surroundings form a horizon in the vision to let the gazed object appear. He points out that our perspective is an object-horizon structure. Our gaze and horizons correlates, which let objects present themselves in front of us. For example, the left two pictures are both images of my cup. We can recognize the picture on the right clearly as a cup's picture, but about the left one, even though I've told you this is also a picture took from my cup, we still cannot recognize it as an object, as a cup, because there's no horizon in this picture. Besides, when we gaze at a thing, we can only see one side of it at a time. This is limited by the body's location, which is called perspective. But we also know that the object being seen has other sides that we do not see. Merleau-Ponty used a metaphor to describe this. He said that we can see an object insofar as objects form a system or a world, and that each of them arranges the others around itself, like spectators of its hidden aspects, and as guaranteeing of their permanence. In other words, even if we can only see one side of a thing at one time, we are simultaneously certain of the possibility of the existence of the other sides, because in my horizon, the other objects in the margin of my vision are witnessing the other sides of the objects. This point will be used to discuss the embodied meaning of the virtual world in Esports later. And when we think about the body and the relation between the limbs and the body itself, it has the same figure horizon structure. As Merleau-Ponty describes that, if I stand in front of my desk and lean on it with both hands, only my hands are accentuated and my whole body trails behind them like a comet's tail. I'm not unaware of the location of my shoulders or my waist. Rather, this awareness is enveloped in my awareness of my hands, and my entire stance is read, so to speak, in how my hands lean upon the desk. In this posture, my hand supporting me and leaning over the desk is the focus of my awareness, in which the position of the rest of my body, like my shoulder or waist, etc., is obscure, but I do not lose the sense of them. Hence, we can perhaps analogize the hand I am aware of to the cup I am gazing at I just mentioned. The positions of the rest of my body parts that surround the hand that is focused on by my attention are similar to other surroundings around the viewed cup in my vision. They recede into the margins of my awareness and become dominant, but they do not cease to be there. The rest of my body is inconspicuous for my awareness, hiding in the background, just as the surroundings of the viewed object hide on the horizon. So if we say that space is a figure horizon structure in our experience, analogously, there's also a bodily space similarly structured by the focused limb and the background, which allows a limb to be the focus of my awareness without losing sense of the other parts. So this indistinguishable speciality of bodily space and the world justify Merleau-Ponty's claim that I am not in space and time, rather I am of space and time. My body fits itself to space and embraces space. And in his discussion on movements, the pathology of Schneider's case works as a point departure from which Merleau-Ponty provides a new understanding of the body's movement. Schneider is a patient suffered from agnosia. He cannot perform actions on command with eyes closed. For example, if a mosquito bites a part of his left hand, he can naturally grasp it. However, when asked to point to the same position with a ruler, he could not do so, even though he clearly understands the instruction and knew what left hand means. Also, Schneider may know how to knock on the door, when he's standing in front of a door, announcing himself. But when asked to stimulate knocking in a situation where the door is hidden or out of reach, he fails to perform the action. Merleau-Ponty and other psychologists studying on Schneider's case regarded the former type of movement, grasping and knocking, as concrete movement, while the latter pointing and stimulating or pretending to knock as abstract movement. Though their interpretation on these two are slightly different. About concrete movement, the simplest case are those movements we do easily in daily life. For example, picking up a cup on the table, like we can just do it so easily without thinking how. About this, Merleau-Ponty argues that places in space are not objective positions in relation to the objective positions of our body. Our body merges with space. As mentioned before, the body is of space, and hence places inscribe around us the variable reach of our intentions and gestures. So at a child's first attempt at grasping, they look at the object instead of the hand. The object in front of us solicits the reaching. Just like Krish says when describing how easily we can pick up the cup. He says the cup can be picked up so easily. It's not because the cup is a representation. It's not because it is a symbol, but rather because my motor experience embraces the cup into a meaningful web of possible motor tasks. And in terms of more complicated habitual skills, Merleau-Ponty argues that is neither a form of knowledge nor automatic reflex, rather knowledge in the moving limbs given through the bodily efforts. By practice over and over again, the body incorporates the instrument into bodily space. So an experienced typist knows where the letters are without looking at it on the keyboard, just as he knows they knows where her limbs are, their limbs are. So this is why Merleau-Ponty argues that skillful coping expresses the power of the body heights of widening his or her being in the world. I view this interaction and incorporation with objects as development of the speciality of the body. And about abstract movement, which Schneider cannot do, a person without Schneider's impairment can move without corresponding to an actual situation. For instance, I can pretend to hold or pick up things without having real things in my hand. To explain this, Merleau-Ponty suggests that it was made possible by the function of projection, by which I organize before myself a free space in which the cup that does not exist naturally can take on a semblance of existence. In other words, a healthy subject can imagine a situation to conjure up the corresponding movements, like an actor is doing role play, and they both do not take the imaginary situation as real. Rather, they each detach their real body from the living situation in order to perform in the imaginary. So by comparing concrete movement with abstract movement, Merleau-Ponty says, within the busy world in which concrete movement unfolds, abstract movement hollows out a zone of reflection and of subjectivity. It superimposes a virtual or human space over physical space. Concrete movement is thus centripetal, while abstract movement is centrifugal. The first takes place within being or within the actual. The second takes place within the possible or within non-being. The first adheres to a given background. The second itself sets up its own background. It's worth noting that abstract movements are not simply representational, but rather based on extended bodily space found in concrete movement. Concrete movements similarly are not simply reflexive and mechanical, but rather situated and directed toward objects in situations. So Merleau-Ponty says movement is not content which passively undergoing space and time. It actively assumes them, it takes them up in their original signification. Furthermore, he says consciousness is originally not an I think that, but rather an I can. So now back to the esports case. We can answer the question that what exactly the virtual world in esports is for us. As mentioned before, an object for me is an object gazed by me and its other surrounding spectators, while the virtual world on screen in esports only has one spectator, the human being. To present an object in the virtual world, we always need to set an artificial horizon for it to let objects appear as an object in the same manner of we see an object in the lived world. So the virtual world in esports is established upon vision and is not a world of space surrounds us in essence, but a simulated space in front of us. Dutoit has a similar view on virtuality in general, saying that what we find as part of the embodied screen is that spatiality is subsumed into the virtual. The body as a measurement of space and time is lost. At the same time, we need to admit that the esports player do perform some skills. The virtual world in esports also connects to players' kinesthetic system, which means it works as much as situations soliciting players' movement. Some researchers found that when changing in form of occurs within the virtual world, the sense of space and the sensations of movement are instantly reconfigured for the experienced player. So they point out a dynamic flux of kinesthetic system at play in esports practice, and a constant requirement on the part of the esports practitioner to constantly reintegrate his or her body with the given virtual world and the possibilities. This is also in line with Dutoit's another view on virtuality, which is what the meaning found in the virtual is the meaning of projection of situations. So as a result, the virtual world on screen, then as a result, we can sum up three attributes of the virtual world in esports. First, it relies on an artificially coded horizon in program to present objects and is created and limited by human creativity. Second, it is built upon vision and only exists in front of us, specifically in front of our eyes. Thirdly, it lacks spatiality, so it does not merge with the body as external space does, but is more like a wall in front of us, which the body cannot go through. That's why Holt said there's a separation of execution domain and application domain. And another researcher said the virtual world lack of deep perception. So in esports practices, the console screen provides a virtual context of the game, and the controller part carries and mediates the actions of participants. Hence, when I'm playing esports, for instance, the situation I am in is not only constituted by the virtual scenes on my computer, but also by my computer itself, my desk, and other entities in my room, and the room itself. At the same time, I operate my keyboard and the mouse mainly according to what I see on the screen. So when I'm so focused on the game, I can even forget the part of the space that is behind me and ignore the events and the people around me. In this case, I'm still in my living room, but I stop in interacting with other beings in the living room. The situation I'm encountering shrinks suddenly into a smaller one formed by my mouse, keyboard, and the virtual world on my screen. In addition, my movements are also, to some degree, determined by the devices. League of Legends usually run on the computer, So my actions are carried out with keyboard and mouse. The esports games runs on Switch, so I use Joy-Con to operate it. The equipment is set up so that its own nature determines what type of action Joy-Conning or key striking players will must do. So combining these two characteristics of esports practice with the attributes of virtual world we just mentioned, so we can say, on the one hand, the situation encountered in esports playing are projected because their contextual meaning is provided by the virtual with the meaning of projection. In this sense, the moves involved in esports and abstract movement are alike. The only difference is that the subject's regular abstract movement are conjured up by personal projection or imagination, whilst esports practices respond to a shared projection on the screen established by the game publisher, which facilitates esports as a collective activity. So I conclude that esports practices involves an abstract attitude. On the other hand, the situation in esports playing is also flattened in the spatial sense, since the virtual world on screen is always in front of me like a wall, cutting off or flattening the extension of existing space in front of me. So as a result, the possibility for movement development are limited. This deduction is also in line with Dutor's and Searle's new technological determinism. They say digital technology artifacts may at once open up a new horizon of experience, while also concretely determining values, system of rationality and thought. And in the case of esports, what is determined includes the pattern of bodily movement. So I'm doing key striking or Joy-Conning, and the abstract attitude of practices, and the possibility for further movement development. So here is the fundamental difference between sports and esports. The situation encountered in esports practices are projected in a contextual sense and flattened in a spatial sense, thus requiring esports practices to take up an abstract attitude with limited potential for further movement development. As sports, like other human activities taking place in the lived world, it opens up to both abstract and concrete movement and affords infinite possibility for movement development. Considering the variety of situations that we can encounter in esports. So in the end, I want to say like elite esports performance undoubtedly involves skillful strategical manipulation of equipment. Like nothing of my argument to deny this. The point is to highlight is that there's a well-recognized distinction between esports and sports, namely the difference between virtual and non-virtual. So my research is to explore what the difference will bring to the bodily movement. So, and if we, as Merleau-Ponty says, if we say consciousness is originally a can, and movement is the way humans take up the world, as Merleau-Ponty argues, it is important to recognize the impact the virtuality may have on movement and to be prudent about fully embracing it. I think the rush conflation of esports with sports disregards the ontological significance of movement and underestimates the very benefits that sports can give us in creating and constructing infinite vivid lived situations that are different from basic everyday life and forcing us to move around the world and take up world in enriching and exceptional ways. And here are my references. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for your presentation. So during your presentation, Florian proposed you some question if he won. But before, Jim, you have a comment to?
Yeah, I just wanted, first of all, to remark upon how much I admire the contributions of Bruno and next Florian and Qian in a second language, or maybe in some cases a third language. It's just remarkable what you guys what you guys are doing. And this presentation, Qian, I have to congratulate you on your deep grasp of a difficult theoretical base. Not many people get Merleau. Not many people read it, but those who do, not many people get Merleau-Ponty, and you do. And the way you apply that to express the difference in bodily competences and so on, and movement development, the differences between real sport and virtual esports, I think is masterly. So just congratulations, that's all.
And thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Jim. Florian, you want exchange with Miss Wong?
Yes, first, thank you very much for your presentation. I think it was really interesting to follow. When you discuss about the physical activity of esports, it brings me the question of the new practices that we saw this year at Singapore during the Olympic Esports Week, like kayak virtual reality, ping pong in virtual reality, bowling or taekwondo virtual reality. Do you think that these practices should be considered as more in the virtual world, like gamified sports, if it makes sense, or if we can consider this as esports?
Yeah, actually, thanks for the question. Actually, it is a very good one, because I didn't mention that in my paper. My discussion on esports only focus on those, like I call it console games, like you play on computers and or like PlayStations. And indeed, those virtual sports like virtual taekwondo and they are another different kind of activities, I would say. Like it's definitely not different from what I just described. So I would more agree with what Jim mentioned, like, for example, the virtual, like in online rowing, like to some degree, that can be regarded as sports, because the virtuality in that activity is only works as a measurement. So it's the kind of instrument used in the activity, but not based on that you conduct that activity. It doesn't have that much influence on it. So I think probably it can be a standard for us to consider, like a virtual activity, like how much the virtuality is involved in that activity, and then we say it's like really virtual, or it's actually not completely like a virtual stuff. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. Actually, I agree, because I tried a lot of this experience when I was in Singapore this year during the Olympic Esports Week. And for instance, as you mentioned, the rowing, you are just practicing the rowing as you are doing in normal room, normal fitness spaces, I would say. And for the cycling, you just have the software of Zwift in front of you when you are doing cycling, but at the end you are doing some sports, I would say. And it was a bit strange for me to see those practices at the same putting at the same table, I would say, than for instance Gran Turismo, which is more on esports. Even if it's a minor game in esports, it's still esport, I would say. Like I was a bit surprised of this like name of the event, like Olympic Esport Week, and the main esport game were only demonstration, like Rocket League was only a demonstration, for instance.
Okay, thank you, Jim.
I'd like to comment on that, Florian, because we are working at the moment on the issue of what we call kinetic esports. That is movement-based video games. And some of these, you know, there's just a dance kind of games where you hop about, you know, because the computer tells you to, and so on. And the question is, what kind of physical movement is it? Is this? It's obviously physical movement, but does it count as sporting type physical movement? And one distinction that we've arrived at so far is the distinction between monosports and duo sports. Now, monosports are where you do them and the other person's reactions are not part of it. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, and duo sports are where your actions depend upon the other person's actions. So that our line goes something like, you will never get a kinetic esport of football because 11 people's actions against 11 people is far too complicated to model.
Too difficult, yes.
So that's going to be almost impossible. Anyway, 50 years ahead. So here's the question. What about Taekwondo? Because, or boxing, part of boxing, that's a duo sport. Part of boxing is not only me going dip, 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 right? But also being smacked in the face. Now, in the esport for Taekwondo, they're treating it as if it were a monosport. It's all about touching targets on the screen, and you're not getting hit back. So they call it virtual sport. They call it virtual Taekwondo, but it's not. It's not. It's just a computer game where you're going dip, 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 dip on the screen. And in Taekwondo, you're doing with your toes, and in boxing, you do it with it makes no difference. So there's some very interesting problems and questions here. And I think this investigation into kinetic, these movement-based and virtual realities, that's a really interesting one.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I felt a bit the same when I observed the virtual taekwondo, because also you need a lot of space for virtual taekwondo. So I think it can be an issue for the democratization of this practice, the space that you need to practice this. Whereas on Zwift for the cycling, you can interact with the other, you can have some little boost, for instance, or you can help your partner of your team. So I'm not sure if it will be mono sport or duo sport for Zwift. I'm not sure.
Definitely mono.
Mono, yeah.
Because the way you interact with the other is mono interaction.
Ah, yes, yeah. Okay, yeah, I think I understand.
Yeah, but it's interesting point.